Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host. This is a podcast where we explore the heart of human endurance and the stories of those who push beyond their limits. And today I'm joined by Tom Hicks, a conservationist, ultra-athlete, and purpose-driven adventurer whose life story is as layered as the landscapes that he explores. From leading efforts against global wildlife crime at the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation to preparing for a South Pole expedition, Tom lives at the intersection of courage, suffering, and meaning. In this conversation, we dive deep into the psychology of pushing past pain, the importance of mentorship and vulnerability, and how suffering might just be the price of purpose. Along the way, we touch on everything from climbing Lenin Peak in Kyrgyzstan to rugby coaching, Ironman training, and the brutal Barclay marathons. If you've ever asked yourself why we willingly suffer and what lies on the other side, this one's for you. Let's get into it. All right, Tom Hicks, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. And you and I have been communicating and coordinating this for probably close to 2 years, I think, like off and on. So we met on LinkedIn, which, as a Gen Xer myself, like I don't do a ton of social media, but we connected on LinkedIn and communicated back and forth. I think maybe after the Kenton Cool interview, and then I've followed some of your adventures as you've posted online, and so I have been looking forward to this conversation because I think your life and your approach takes a very multi-dimensional view of what adventure means in your life and what it can mean in other people's lives. So I think it's a perfect fit for the tone and tenor of the conversations with my On Adventure podcast. So it's a Friday afternoon where you're at, morning where I'm at, and so I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today.
No, thanks so much. Like I say, it's been a long time coming, and I've been a listener of the pod for many years. So it's exciting to be part of it with you.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about who Tom Hicks is, and I just gave away a little bit of it, but where you're at and what you spend your days doing.
Yeah, so alluded to it a little bit, but I'll sort of start with the day job, the 9 to 5. So 9 to 5, I work for an organization called the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation. So we're a conservation NGO based in the UK, just south of London, but we operate across Africa and Asia. The main purpose of our existence, our organization, is to fight wildlife crime. So we do a lot of work in trying to take down syndicates that are perpetuating the trade in illegal wildlife. So that comes from undercover investigations, anti-poaching work, also then demand reduction campaigns. And we do a lot of community outreach and engagement as well. So communities that are vulnerable to falling into line with those organizations, we work to try and mitigate those threats. And we're in about 18 countries. My role within that is working with trusts and foundations and corporate partners. So building on my academic experience of an undergrad and postgrad in wildlife conservation, I work to utilize funds from the private sector as well as them from institutional organizations, invest them into our conservation delivery, and then do the impact assessments and working with partners to ensure that they're happy and informed on what we're doing, all building towards, like I say, just trying to fight wildlife crime and put a stop to the slaughter of elephants, rhinos, pangolins, all these species, which I'm sure you've all heard about. But the war on wildlife is continuing. And so, day to day, that's what I'm working to try and make a small difference in my own small way. Outside of those kind of things, I do a lot of sports coaching. So I used to be a full-time rugby coach, and you guys in the US, rugby's really taken off over there. So it's an exciting time for you guys. But I was a full-time coach, now I do it kind of part-time in evenings and weekends. And then when I'm not doing that, I just like to try and get out and take on some adventures as often as I can. And in the UK, where I live, it's not the most mountainous, certainly not the snowiest. So it comes with a lot of kind of trail hikes, but then try and get up to Scotland as often as I can. Try and take on some of the mountains up there, and then also try and get as far afield as I possibly can and test myself and experience some new cultures and new experiences and new environments as well. So that's me in a 2-minute nutshell, I suppose.
Yeah. So this day job that you just kind of blew right through it. I mean, that sounds like an intense thing to be involved with. Now, the way you described it, if I understand that correctly, you're on the maybe this isn't the right term, but fundraising side, the revenue engine that finds the money that comes into the organization so that the fighting can be done. But do you get involved with any of the kind of on the ground? I mean, that sounds dangerous and intense
Yeah.
in fighting syndicates that are out there trying to kill these animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you're right. The word syndicate is the one I use because that's what they are. The days are gone of poaching and poachers being kind of like one guy with a bolt action rifle that goes out and
Mm-hmm.
for subsistence reasons. Illegal wildlife trade is the third largest illegal trade behind weapons, drugs, and then it's illegal wildlife trade, which is 20 billion estimated a year. That
Wow. What are they trading? Is it like the ivory tusks, or is it?
Yeah, the ones that kind of get the headlines are, you know, elephant ivory, which is purely for decorative purposes. So they'll shoot. Generally, they're now looking. You know, they take out kind of herds of elephants rather than, as I say, one man with a bolt action. They've got
Oh, wow.
heavily militarized, heavily armed, well organized, well funded because they've got all this money behind them. So they'll lay ambushes. They'll take out 15, 20, 25, 30 elephants in one go, mow them down, and a lot of the time they'll remove the tusks while the elephant's still alive because they want to get in and out as quick as they can. They'll then get shipped, generally speaking, into countries like China, Vietnam, Hong Kong as well, where it's used as a kind of status symbol to have on your wall. So then you have that, and you also then have rhino horn pangolin scales, which are used for traditional Chinese medicine. So the belief is that they can cure anything from a hangover to, like having a brain tumor. They'll take these substances, but there's no medicinal value to them. They're made out of keratin, which is the same thing that our fingernails and hair and toenails are made out of. So there's a huge body of work going on about trying to change the behavior of the consumers because we try and look at both ends of the spectrum. Obviously, we try and stop it at source. So we then have anti-poaching units on the ground. And very sadly, in the last decade, about 1,500 wildlife rangers have been killed in the line of duty.
1,500?
Yeah, across
Wow.
Africa. So yeah, they're going up against, like I say, well armed, heavily armed, militarized groups of individuals, and conservation is, as a sector, is not well funded because it's generally through philanthropy, and also working with the private sector as well. But we haven't got 20 billion going into it, so we need to work to try and resource the rangers as best we can to go and put them in a position where they can try and take down these operations as safely and securely as they possibly can. So yeah, we work with organizations on the front line of wildlife crime across Africa and Asia. And I was lucky enough to be in Vietnam last year and Thailand, and I went out with the anti-poaching guys there. And I have to stress, it wasn't on a route that generally they expect to have lots of action because me not being trained in that environment, but seeing the environment those guys work in and the stresses they're under. And also have to add, there's highly skilled teams of just all female rangers as well now, which is fantastic. But yeah, that war on wildlife is brutal. As you said, yeah, at the beginning of the question, like it's quite a stressful environment because you're aware of the pressures that we're under. And every 15 minutes, an elephant in Africa is poached for its ivory, and 1,000 rhinos a year are being poached as well. So in the course of this podcast, there'll be maybe 4 or 5 elephants will have been poached in Africa. So it kind of brings it home on the day to day.
Yeah, and so it makes sense that the efforts would also be on not only on the activity but on the demand side, changing the views or expectations on the demand side, or the criminality of it. I don't know how that could be ramped up, but that makes sense. Now I am curious how young Tom Hicks got interested in this. And this seems like a very specific path. So kind of rewind the video a little bit and tell me where all this started for you.
I think for me, I've always had a sort of intrinsic proclivity for wildlife, being outdoors, exploring woods, forests, open spaces in the UK, just always been involved in that kind of area. And that's what I've always enjoyed doing. I was fortunate when I was probably 11 or 12 to go out to Zimbabwe with my mum and my stepdad, and just seeing the landscape, the environment, it tricked for me. That's it. This is what I want to do. And it always been that for me. It was just from those experiences. And then obviously with documentaries on TV and David Attenborough and these kind of guys that spearhead this space. But I think what came from those experiences was understanding not just how majestic and beautiful these landscapes and species are, and the people that live there as well. it's them realizing the threats that are facing them. And that sort of started to draw me towards more of a purpose-led career. So more of a vocation, I suppose, than a career you kind of fall into. And understanding the threats and seeing where the points of difference are and if there's anywhere that I could make a difference. And that led me to uni and to studying conservation from those early childhood experiences. But I didn't take the normal route. So when I was at school, I was probably a little bit disruptive. I think probably probably more focused on what was happening outside the classroom than what was inside the classroom. And that led me to having conversations with tutors who told me that university education was not for someone of my academic ability. I remember the quote to this day where they basically said, look, don't bother, don't try, you're not going to amount to that. I had another teacher that said to me, he said to me that he basically put his hand up by his head and said, here's the best student I've ever taught. And then he went down to like a sort of waist high, here's the worst student I've ever taught. And then he basically got on the floor and said, here's where you are. So I left school with a really, in a very negative headspace, and just didn't think that I could achieve what I wanted to achieve. Fortunately, there are people in my life that I lent on, and friends, family, and a couple of ex-teachers as well who didn't have the same opinion of me, and was able to then go and do a conservation undergraduate degree. And I had to start with a foundation degree because I didn't have the grades to get into university straight off the bat. So I took the scenic route when it comes to getting into conservation and getting the qualifications to do it. But it all stemmed back to those early childhood experiences of seeing wildlife and nature, and then just understanding that it's under threat, and it's still under threat. And I wanted to try and make sure that I was doing something that made a difference in a very small way. And I'm aware that sounds kind of arrogant and ethereal as to what I want to do in my life. But I suppose, to answer the question, it came from those experiences, and then just understanding that if we don't do something as a species to try and protect the natural world, it will disappear. And so, through that scenic route and those setbacks at school, that led me then to working for David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, where I am today.
Gotcha. Well, I guess any scenic route gives you better views than you otherwise would have gotten. So, but I also think shame on those teachers and tutors for creating a storyline like that in your head, which clearly is not correct. I mean, just in the 30 minutes that we've been talking, you're obviously a very intelligent person that has accomplished many things, and that story doesn't line up with that. So, but it's interesting that, for all of us growing up, when we look to adults that are supposed to have their act together, and the things they say about us matter, that those words become the stories that we internalize. And it's really cool to hear that you had other voices that you had in your life that overrode that, so that negativity isn't what sunk in. That's great.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. And like I've said that, I think one of the best is actually when I was on Kilimanjaro 5 years ago, having a conversation. You have these amazing conversations when you're on adventures, as you know, you can get really deep and have these brilliant chats. And someone asked me a similar question, like, how did that happen? How did it change?
Mm-hmm.
How did your mindset change? And honestly, when I left school, I watched a lot of YouTube videos of kind of like, I was exposed to this world of motivational speakers and life coaches and adventurers and people that you could get inspired from. Because when you're in school, your blinkers, you got the blinkers on. You're very focused on just the next exam, that next bit of coursework, and your sphere of influence and your sphere of exposure is quite limited. It's your college, it's your school, it's high school, whatever it is. So when I left, I was exposed to these people, and it was a quote from a guy called Les Brown, who, if anyone listening is aware of Les Brown, he's an amazing speaker. And he said exactly that. One of his quotes was, someone's opinion of you does not have to become your reality. And that for me, when I was 18, 19, I was like, oh my God, I get it. That was that person's opinion of me, but I'm in this space now where I'm letting that person's opinion, that teacher's opinion, define my scope, like how much I can achieve and where I want to go in my life. And so when I learned that, and I read a couple of his books, and books by Jim Rohn and a few other people, and also a lot of the people in adventure have similar stories where they found adventure and they found expeditions through, taking the scenic route, to use that phrase again. So learning from those guys like Ranulph Fiennes, his books, similar, he had a similar experience at school, and it was leaning on those resources, and then people around me were supportive, and we got my act together in terms of realizing I could go to uni and I could do something that interested me. And we're here now.
That's really cool, man. I'm going to look up this guy, Les Brown. I've not heard of him.
He's cool.
The other thing that comes to mind, I got a friend that says, "Don't let people live rent free in your head." You
Yeah,
know,
such a good phrase. Yeah.
yeah, that's easier said than done, certainly. And so, very cool to hear how you kind of worked your way through that. And so, let me ask you something real quick about your childhood. So, you said you kind of had these trips and you were outdoors. Was that the outdoor part and the, even the kind of pushing yourself into new areas, was that something that your mom and stepdad, like, was it a family framework, or is that just something that young Tom just kind of did? You just kind of went out and explored.
I have to give credit to my parents. They let me just kind of explore stuff and go for it. It was definitely kind of intrinsic within me that I always wanted to go, and like, when you're small, I was the one that was always coming back covered in mud and leaves and twigs and cuts and bruises from just kind of going out and doing things that I shouldn't do. But intrinsically, I was probably quite a nervous, like, younger child. And so yeah, the encouragement of like my mum and my family network to be able to just give me the confidence to go out and do things. And I was always really sporty, and basically kind of any kind of outdoor activity was what interested me, which is probably why I didn't do particularly well at school, because being
Mhm.
confined to a classroom wasn't great for me. And I think there's a lot of kids out there, and there's this great picture that I think every year Richard Branson shares it on LinkedIn. Obviously, we mentioned we met on LinkedIn. That's
Mhm.
where I spend a lot of time. There's a picture of a tree, and there's an elephant, a chimp, a rhino, and I think it's some sort of like gazelle or that kind of. And there's an examiner standing there, and he goes, right, to make it fair, you're all going to pass the same test, and the test is you've got to climb that tree. And so obviously the elephant's like, how the hell am I going to do that? The chimp flies up it,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and that's kind of what it was like for me at school. I was not.
That's a great illustration.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't fit that mold particularly,
Mhm.
and yeah, I was more excited by what was happening outside. And there's a brilliant documentary that's just come out. I think hopefully, touch wood, it won't be his last, but it's one of David Attenborough's last documentaries potentially. And in it he talks about how if children don't grow up knowing about nature, when they're older they won't care and they won't want to conserve it. And for me, that was the journey I was on. Was I was always connected to it. I was always outside, and that meant that I always had this proclivity to want to try and work within it and do what I can to support it. So yeah, for young me, it was definitely experiences that were just facilitated by my parents to allow me to go and get
That's great.
covered in mud and leaves and twigs and things, for sure.
Yeah. So one of the things I did read on your profile too is you spend a lot of time mentoring younger kids,
Mm.
and I get it now why you do that. I mean, that obviously was such an important key to a big transition in your life. But tell me a little bit more about what and why you do that in the mentorship area.
Yeah, so that kind of came through the coaching side. So initially I worked at a school as a rugby coach in the school, and conversations you'd have with pupils, and you realize that at school they're educated, about what's in the textbook, but in terms of what the rest of the educational experience should be about what they can be capable of or what their perception of themselves is, I thought was lacking. And then through being a full-time coach, primarily working with under teenagers from sort of 15 to 18, you realize that everyone's different and they've all got their own struggles as well as things that they enjoy. And I think there was a few interactions where players would play it like a gread game. There'd be no issues, but the first thing they would do, they'd come off and either apologize to me as the coach for something they did in the game. And I remember thinking, for 70 minutes, that guy's been running around, but all he's been thinking about in his head is that one moment, is that
Mhm.
that 2 second moment. And I thought there's an area here that is lacking in terms of ability to be resilient to setbacks, but also like just mental health in younger people is really challenging. And I think if in the ways that I work with kids now and through the coaching side of things is just to try and pillar it with key objectives. And the first one is like just make sure they're not being so hard on themselves, because I did
Mm.
that a lot. I beat myself up hugely. It stemmed from being quite competitive as a child. Still am very competitive,
Mhm.
but I wasn't the cleverest, as we spoke about. I certainly didn't have the best grades. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the tallest. I wasn't the strongest. And so I used to get like frustrated because I couldn't compete where I wanted to. And
Mhm.
therefore, I'd then give myself a really difficult time of things and beat myself up. having that introspection and realizing that's how I used to behave and still do. Like I had a bad, I'm training for an Ironman 70.3 at the moment, had a bad swim on Monday. I spent most of Tuesday beating myself up about it. So I'm definitely not perfect, but seeing younger people giving themselves a really hard time about things really kind of affected me, because I could see myself in the processes they're going through. So I really work now to try and give them some tools to work through that, and also just give themselves some positive affirmations to try and counteract the negative thought processes they've got. And I've learned as much from them as I'm sure, well, more than I'm sure they learn from me. And it's very informal. Like it's not a consultancy or anything. It's mainly through relationships with parents of the guys that I'm coaching, who just say, would you mind just having a chat with him or her and seeing if you can help at all. And I think having those conversations is really valuable. And I think specifically for that key area from like 16 to 18, 19, that can really shape certainly your 20s, because I went through the process I spoke about, going into that stage of 16 to 18, thinking that wasn't going to achieve a huge amount. I was very disassociated with life in general. And I really want to make sure that kids that I interact with in that space don't have the same experiences that I do.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you, like on Tuesday, how did you work yourself through that negative voice so that it didn't sink in and override what you're actually accomplishing? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, it's perspective. And that's something that mountaineering and adventure has given me is perspective. When you've had the experience of being somewhere completely remote and doing something completely different, you have time to think and reflect, and you also come back with new skills and experiences. And when you come out of it from being on the granular level of that one bad workout or that one bad day at the office or whatever it is, one bad interaction you've had, when you scale it up from the granular to the macro, you realize that it doesn't actually matter. And there's these phrases that I sort of used before. If it won't matter in 5 years' time, don't spend more than 5 minutes worrying about it.
That's
and
good.
I think for me that's something that I struggle with, and it's something that's a continual work on for me, is not dwelling on things too much. And having the ability to go out into mountains or adventure or into whatever it is, to get yourself out of whatever it is that's causing you that negative headspace, is really important. And but on an actionable level, obviously the mental side there is have that perspective and realize it's not going to matter in 5 years. It's part of the process. But do something like snap your mindset out of it. Don't just, if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just working away and my mind's going, like hit a circuit breaker, either go for like another workout or something completely different, go outside, put a podcast on, do something that's going to just like circuit break that headspace, give yourself the chance to have that perspective, and then you can then move on from it. And it's difficult. And certainly, like, my partner and I we're both training for the same Ironman 70.3, and having someone in your life that you can talk to also really helps, whether it's your partner, your friends, parents, whatever. Just say to them, like, open up to them a little bit and just say to them, I'm struggling with that. I really didn't enjoy that workout. It was crap, or that day at the office, or that interaction, whatever it is. Like, opening up to people is really important. That coupled with then just that circuit breaker in terms of those actionables can really just clear your headspace, and you can go, right, okay, I'm back on track now. We can crack on with it. But it's definitely iterative. You're never gonna fix it. It's always gonna be something you have to keep working through.
That's super helpful, actually, for me. So nobody else may listen to this, but what you just said, I'm writing that down and taking it with me. But because I think, like everybody else or a lot of other people, I get into that it's a default mode network. I think, where it's just head trash, and that internal voice is just cracking the whip to get things moving. And unfortunately, the whip cracking works sometimes, and until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, it fizzles out spectacularly. But it's really, that default mode is really, for me, is really well ingrained. That negative self-talk, the critic, is really well ingrained. And I love that idea of find a circuit breaker, a way to just break the rhythm of what's happening and bring, our brains are fascinating, but the way you override the default mode network is you bring your prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, the more evolved part of our brains. You have to bring that back online.
Yeah.
And the circuit breaker is a great way to do that. That is such a good idea.
Yeah. And I think developing a relationship with that negative thought, and Sean Swarner, who's a compatriot of yours, who I did Kili with, he talks about giving that negative presence that's sort of weighing down on you and cracking the whip, to use your phrase. Give it a name, and you can then start conversing with it. And I used that chat from Sean with one of the guys that I was mentoring, and I just said, because he was particularly really beating himself up and putting himself under a lot of pressure, because he obviously that head's whatever he called it in his head was cracking the whip the whole time. You need to be doing more. That wasn't good enough. Yeah. And I said, okay, think about it this way. Would you rather have that voice in your head or not have it? And he thought about it and he thought, I'd rather have it. I said, yeah, because that's going to drive you. We've just got to shift the relationship a little bit so that you can understand when it's being like you said, it's being overactive and it's now becoming detrimental. But having that voice in your head is a positive thing, because it's going to help you get to that next workout, get to that next adventure, send that next email to get sponsorship or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's just so crucial to have that positive relationship with it. And don't get me wrong, anyone listening to this, I don't have it nailed down completely. I have real dark days where I'm beating myself up, like I said on Monday. Then it's just, okay, what are the actionable things that I can do to change this? And it's talk to someone who whose opinion you value, but then also like just circuit break, stop thinking about it, go and do something completely different.
Yeah. The other thing you said there too was having that companionship with someone that you can be vulnerable and open up with. And I think that's such a good point, that in contrast to maybe I don't know if this is implicit or explicit in the world today, but this idea of the adventurer does this thing by themselves. They climb the mountain themselves. They did the race themselves. That is such a lie. Nobody does anything by themselves. Even, and I've had my previous guest, Matt Walker, who's has a psychology degree and he's a mountain climbing guide. He's got 5 elements of adventure, and companionship is one of the 5. Like, it's not an adventure unless you got somebody that's in it with you. And it can be something as simple as, I need some support here. She may not be climbing the mountain with you, or your buddy may not be out doing the race with you, but they're helping you along the way. And because of that, they're part of the adventure. So I really appreciate you sharing that part too.
Yeah, it's great. I was chatting to, just from business as well. I was chatting to a lady called Julia Davies, who the outdoor company Osprey, the clothing manufacturer.
Yeah. I got a backpack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone does. Yeah. So she sold her stake in Osprey a few years ago and made a lot of money, and she was one of the founders of one of the arms of Osprey. And we're talking about the notion of self-made. You said that, self-made, or you climbed this, and she just said exactly as you did. Completely refutes that notion that anybody is self-made. You have to lean on people around you, because otherwise, there's no point to it, because you're going to get half of it, half of the value out of it by just being on your own. And secondly, whether you like it or not, you will have used knowledge, experiences, conversations, whatever it is, skill sets of other people on the way. And it's so obviously the same in adventure and mountaineering as well. You cannot climb alone a lot of the time, and people do, but they're it's the few and far between people that have really successful careers and journeys and adventures who just do it alone. And there are a few out there, but personally for me, being part of a team is part of the fun.
Yeah. So Tom, what you're describing in both the way you approach your life and adventure in specifically, but then how you work through these things, to me is very, I don't know what the word is, evolved or enlightened. I mean, so I think I've come across very few people that are just that way. And you might be one of these people where you're just kind of born insightful, deep thinking. I think the other alternative to that is that it's earned, and it's earned through hardship, difficulties, struggle, suffering. So not to give you just like 2 limiting choices, but would you put yourself in either one of those categories?
I would say that the person I am now and the way I approach things, problems, whether in life or in adventure or in business, has come a lot from what I've learned along the way. And I think the key thing is probably to answer your question in two ways. Ultimately, I think from intrinsically, I'm quite a curious person. I quite like learning new things. I quite like experiencing new things, which has then led me to then being this way inclined and how I approach things. So I don't think well, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but certainly for me, I don't think I was born with the ability to adapt to problems or have the answers. I don't have all the answers, definitely don't have all the answers, but the answers that I do have, I definitely wasn't born with them. And I think I go back to like when I was probably 5, maybe 4 or 5, and I got sent home with a report card. It was like a joke. It was like a joke one from the teachers saying Tom makes mountains out of molehills. And I was 5, and I said to my mum, "That's a good thing, isn't it? Like I've got something small and I can make it bigger." And my mum was like, "Yeah, whatever. Yeah, okay, whatever you think." And when I was younger, I catastrophized quite a lot, I think, and I wouldn't say I was born with the ability to be resilient. And I think, and if any of my teachers or people that knew when I was younger listen to this, they would attest to that. So I think, but I was always curious, and so hopefully that curiosity has led me to kind of where I've got to now, where I don't make mountains out of molehills as often as I may have done. I definitely still probably do it. So yeah, intrinsically, definitely wasn't born the way I am now, for sure.
So I mean, I would consider you a resilient person. You wouldn't be able to do the things that you do if you weren't. But did that switch flip at some point, or was it more gradual as you've done one thing that leads to the next, that leads to the next?
I think I probably wasn't tested physically or mentally until I was a little bit older. And it was doing those kind of experiences, whether it was through marathons and the training that comes with it, or from doing mountains and other expedition things. I don't think I was tested until sort of like early 20s. And that's where I think I found enjoyment in quite a sadistic way in suffering and building resilience. And I enjoy, and I'm definitely not like someone that's going to go and complete the Barkley marathons or anything on that level, but on my own small level, I enjoy putting myself in a situation that I know is going to test me a little bit, and I like being in an environment that I know is going to stretch my capacity. But in terms of the resiliency, it's definitely been something that I've learned over the years from being tested. And I think maybe it is kind of in you or not in you, fight or flight. If you are under stress, do you run towards it and do you go and actively seek it again, or do you pull back from it and say, look, that's kind of not for me? And I think for me, I found a lot of kind of introspection through endurance events, marathons and triathlons, things like that, as well as then on adventures as well, because like I say, it gives you that perspective, that time to think, to pull back and realize who you are, what you're about, what you enjoy. But certainly there's definitely been days where I've not felt resilient, and you do beat yourself up and you feel like you don't want to do that workout or go on that expedition, and the fear element does come back. But ultimately, I think I just enjoy. I think probably a lot of your listeners are the same. We just enjoy finding out what we're made of.
Why do you think you enjoy that?
It's a great question. I think it links back to my intrinsic competitiveness. I think I'm a very competitive individual, and so when things get tough, physically or mentally, I see it as a challenge, and I just think, okay, well, we're not going to give up, so we're going to have to negotiate our way through this. Whether we finish last or we don't finish at all, we're going to make sure that we give it our best. So I think it's fed from the competitiveness as the kind of the why. On a more ethereal basis, on the expeditions I do, I always try and raise money for charity, and so there's that outside why, the driver of why you're here, why you're doing what you're doing. But it's a question that we as adventurers always get asked, isn't it? Why why would you want to go to the North Pole? Why would you want to go and do Everest? Why would you want to go and run that trail run through whatever national park it is? And it does come down, I think, on a granular level, in sort of internally. I think it's just competitiveness and wanting to see what I'm made of, and that drives the next one, because you want to try and push for the next thing and the next thing, even when it is really, really tough, and you do experience failures. And so a relationship with failure is also really important. But the why question is one I've pondered a lot, and I do think it is, it's that competitiveness and that drive, and maybe ego as well. I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say there's an element, for me particularly, I don't want to speak for anyone else, like I say, but for me there's probably has to be an element of ego around it, to be able to say you've done something or you've learned from that thing, because it's fun to say and it's fun to do. So yeah, being honest with myself, probably a bit of ego, but
yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that's inevitable. I think part of our humanness would be that aspect, but that also, if it was just that, I don't think you'd keep going back.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, things I want to get to this in a second and kind of go through the list of the different things you've pursued over your life, but they've been hard things. And I don't think if it was just ego driven that you would keep pushing the limit.
Yeah.
One of my previous guests named Robbie Linfesti, he had this great illustration of kind of circles, and like the comfort zone is right in the middle. And then you expand that into, I forget all the layers, but basically you have to expand out of the comfort zone to get to the growth zone. And the growth zone, and the problem is if you don't keep expanding, you atrophy. It's the person that sits on the couch over and over and over again. Physically, you can't do as much as you used to could. But he had this great point of, if you expand the growth zone too far, you're in the death zone. So there is some thinking and processing that has to go into every adventurer's decision of, am I in the growth zone or have I crossed over to the death zone?
Yeah.
And how do you maneuver through that? How do you know what too much, how much is too much?
Yeah. I think on a day-to-day basis, I had a conversation with someone the other week about this and about burnout and how that manifests itself. And I think there's definitely a culture on social media, particularly among kind of like men, between 20 and 50, that burnout is kind of this thing to be revered, that you've worked yourself so hard it's into the ground, but it really isn't. There's so many detrimental aspects to it.
Absolutely.
And even just from a productivity perspective, if you're all about being as productive as you can be, getting to the point of burnout is the worst thing you can do. So
yeah,
I think
that is not
understanding the
optimal.
signs, yeah, for sure. Like, and if that's your metric of how optimal you are, the sensible thing to do is to not get yourself to that situation. So
Exactly.
day to day, it's kind of understanding how your body works. And for me, I get like, the first thing that starts to flare up with me when my body's stressed is I just get really sleepy. I get really fatigued and tired. And I was chatting to one of the guys I go running with, he's a PT, and he was saying your body doesn't know the difference between physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress. So if you're stressed at the office, your body treats that stress the same as when you go and put yourself through a hard workout or a hard trail run or an expedition. Stress is stress. The body doesn't differentiate between it. And I know that the first thing that flares up when I'm overstressed is, or into that death zone, you pushed it too far, is I know that I just get really sleepy, which A, isn't effective. It's not great when you're in the office and you're yawning all the time. So I know on a kind of day-to-day basis that those are those kind of metrics that I know of, that when I know I'm burning the candle at both ends, I'm pushing too much. When it then comes to on adventures and expeditions, there's really stark kind of reminders, I think, from when I was in Kyrgyzstan last year, where people did push it too far, and with the weather, we basically got up to Camp 3, which was like 6,100 meters or so, and basically a big weather front was coming in. And when you're that high up, you can see it coming. Particularly when you're on a mountain like Lenin, where it's higher than anything else around it. So you are sort of on a periscope almost poking up above, and you can just see clouds rolling in, and that was scary. And you do then start to think, okay, am I pushing it too far here? On a basically pushing my luck almost.
Yeah.
And conversations were had, and we decided to, again, going back to our point about being in a team, if I'm building a team, I don't want to be the best. I want to be part of the best. I don't want to be the person. I don't want to be the one person that knows the most, or because A, I'm not going to learn as much, but B, also you've got to have people that have got different skill sets, different abilities and experiences. And fortunately, I was working with a guy called Cami, who's a Sherpa. He's on Everest at the moment. He's like a rock star, and so certainly I was part of the best working with him. And the decision was made for us that we won't camp at Camp 3, we'll head back down and to take refuge at Camp 2. And yeah, a team decided not to do that, and they pushed out of that circle, that outer circle that you spoke about. And yeah, very, sadly the weather came in and they got stranded up on the ridge line, and the radios were going off, and the mountain we were on, there's no infrastructural search and rescue. You're kind of out there and you'd be almost self-sufficient. And fortunately, I think it was a team from Poland, these climbers who just kind of sacrificed their summit attempt to go and help these guys out, found them, and they had life-changing injuries through frostbite, ears, fingers, nose, that kind of stuff. And that was a real reminder to me that there's limits to not just what you're capable of, but what you're allowed to do in these environments. So learning from people like Cami, who made the call that we're not going to push on, always make sure that failure is not ultimate. You can always have another go at some point. So yeah, from a day-to-day perspective, understanding my body and knowing when I'm pushing it a bit too far. And then on an expedition level, it is really just about trying to be part of the best and not being the best yourself, and listening to advice. And then when the advice comes in, listen to it. Cami he's unbelievable. Yeah, he's been Everest 5 times, bottleneck on K2, multiple summits of Lenin Peak and various other 8,000 meter mountains. And you'd be stupid not to listen to someone like that. So, but yeah, to answer the question about knowing when you're pushing it too far, knowing your body is really important. But then also, when you're at the coalface of an expedition, is listening to advice and support around you. And one of the guys just said, he said, you got a 10% chance of summiting and making it back. And I said, and Cami and I were talking with Mark as well, who was also leading the expedition. Well, if you said when you leave for work in the morning, you've got a 10% chance of making it home, you wouldn't go, would you? And we just went, no. Well, then that's the decision made. Putting it in that context. So yeah, it was a stark reminder for sure of when not to keep pushing, because ultimately it can lead to life-changing injuries and sometimes obviously also fatalities.
Man, that's significant. So I'm not familiar with Peak Lenin, and I'm going to assume that some of my listeners also would not be as familiar with that as maybe the 2 other mountains you mentioned with Everest and K2 or some of the other big peaks. So tell us a little bit about how and why you picked that mountain to go after.
Yeah, so to answer the why question, it also comes back to, why do you do these kind of things? Why do we push ourselves? Why do we go after it? And the first thing was on a very operational level. I needed sponsorship, so I needed a hook. And Peak Lenin is part of a 5 mountains that in what was the USSR. They now lie in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan.
Okay.
And it's called the Snow Leopard Challenge, and it's the 5 highest mountains in that region. And Peak Lenin is one of them. So I knew that there was a hook there to acquire sponsorship, because I would be raising money for snow leopard conservation by climbing a snow leopard mountain. So that was one of the reasons why to go and hit that one. I always wanted to try and push myself and see if I could get to 7,000 meters, and unfortunately we weren't able to, as I say, due to weather, etc. But in terms of the why, it was raising money for conservation, but also, like, a lot of people go to Nepal and that those mountain regions, and obviously being in the UK, loads of people head over to the Alps and do lots of climbing there. I'd never met anybody that had gone to Kyrgyzstan before, and so until I met a lady called Holly Budge, who's also someone that would be great for you to chat to as well. She's unbelievable adventurer, conservationist, and she'd done one of the Silk Road ultra bike races through there, and basically speaking about what an amazing country Kyrgyzstan is. And so I just thought, right, let's go for it. Let's have at it and have a crack at it. And so it's a mountain that lies in the Pamir mountain ranges. So it's kind of the western part that then feeds into the Himalayas that come down into India and Pakistan. And it's remote. It's certainly the remotest that I've been to. It's, not to paint a really bleak picture and try and make myself sound tough and whatever, it's the scene of the 2 worst climbing disasters on records. So there was an avalanche, I think, in '98, which took out all of Camp 2, and I think 30 plus climbers were swept into the glacier and were either killed on impact with the avalanche, or then through falling into crevasse and into the glacier. And there was also another very sad moment where an all female team tried to be the first all female team to climb. They did climb, but the weather changed like it did when we were in those environments. They were stuck on the summit. The summit's a little bit, it's definitely not like the Matterhorn or Ama de Blam, like it's a sort of long sloping summit. So summit day is really long. It can take a long time. They got stranded up there, and very sadly, they all passed away as well. So I knew going into it, it was a pretty risky environment to go into, but going back to our point, I wanted to kind of experience something new, somewhere that I didn't know a lot of people had been to, and test myself and see where I was at in terms of technical climbing ability, but also then ability to sustain an expedition for kind of, 4.5 weeks or so. But it's a beautiful mountain. It's in, like, Kyrgyzstan is such a cool place. Like, I really can't recommend it highly enough for your listeners to, if you ever get the chance to go there. It's beautiful. It's you've got these sort of meadow plains, and then you've got these huge mountains, and it's awesome. So yeah, that was the kind of the why behind it, was challenge myself, see what I was made of, but also try and raise some money for snow leopard conservation too.
So, and it's got to be heavy to be in spots where not only steps that people have taken in the past and perished, but to be on the mountain while that's happening is super heavy. Now, you had also mentioned to me, and I've talked to enough folks that have spent time on big mountains that I don't want to say this is what comes with it, but it happens a lot that either advertently or inadvertently people push into the death zone and don't come back. But if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about your buddy that had an accident while on an expedition as well.
Yeah. So speaking to your point of knowing when to push and when not to push, and how when you go into environments that are unfamiliar, it's not a game. When they bite, they bite. It's not like being in the classroom where you can have another go.
Yeah.
And I learned that in a very stark way. So a really good close connection of mine, a guy called Dixie Dansercoer, who some of your listeners may be familiar with him. He was a preeminent polar explorer of the last kind of 20-30 years. He has multiple North Pole, South Pole, crossed Greenland, loads of work in Svalbard, up in Norway as well. Just and just an unbelievable bloke from Belgium. And I first came across him in probably 2016. I reached out to, I was reading a book on polar exploration, and I'd always wanted to go to the North Pole. That was my kind of big goal for me, was to hit the North Pole if I could. And I spoke to a guy called Tom Avery, who's a British guy who'd done the South Pole, and he's stolen the best title for a polar book that I've heard of, which is called Pole Dance, which is the best name for a polar book. So I was reading that, and I reached out to Tom and said, look, this is what I want to do. And he put me in touch with Dixie, and Dixie was great for me in terms of helping me with my training. And then also he would sit in sponsorship phone calls with me and help me try and leverage money to sponsor, someone like me who hasn't got a name or a big brand behind me, trying to leverage money out to form a sponsorship package and stuff. And then that was all happening, and then we got into the COVID period, and I was hoping to go out to Greenland to do the Arctic Circle Trail with Dixie as a bit of training and a bit of fun and spend some time together. We in the UK had like a mini lockdown, where we had like the big lockdown, and there was they called it, like, I don't know what they called it. It was like a mini one for like 3 weeks to try and stop the spread of the pandemic. So I couldn't go, and Dixie was then going off to do I think it was east to west or west to east, cross Greenland. The middle of Greenland is basically like a huge ice sheet, and and it's like almost like a massive glacier the whole way through, and it's a treacherous region, but people have done it before, and Dixie very familiar with it. And very sadly, as they were going across, they got into a crevasse field, and Dixie sadly fell through, and they were never able to recover him. And that for me was very difficult, because to me he was like the Shackleton, he was the man, and he realized that if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. And so my risk appetite certainly went down massively after that incident, because I think before then I was probably a little bit gun-ho, young bloke who's excited by adventure and expeditions, and you think, let's go for it, and then something like that happens, and you realize, Christ, it's not a game. And so my risk appetite really did take a tumble after that, and it was something I contemplated a lot before going off to Kyrgyzstan to do Peak Lenin. Was, is this a good idea? Is this a stupid idea? Are you getting in too deep? Is this something that you really want to be doing? So a lot of introspecting, and it also obviously has an impact on your friends and family as well that you're going to leave behind. So it's not just you making that decision for, because something happens to you. It's not just going to be you that's going to be affected. So Dixie's passing was difficult because he was a mentor, friend, and he'd helped me a huge amount, and it was just unexpected, obviously, because he was the man. He was the main guy in that space. So
you were considering going on that expedition with him?
So I was going to be hopefully doing a what's called the Arctic Circle Trail, which is it's quite a good hiking route in summer, and then in winter it's like a kind of training ground for polar expeditions. And so he and I were going to do that, and then he was then going off to do this cross-Greenland expedition straight after. So sadly didn't get to do the Arctic Circle Trail with him. And then again, like I say, that fed into my plans going forward. I definitely contemplate things a lot more than I did before. And if anyone's ever in Belgium, there's an amazing statue to Dixie, which I was lucky enough to go and visit last year. Pay my respects to his statue where he was from. So if anyone's in that part of the world, definitely go and see it.
That's it frames, and you said it perfectly. This isn't a game. I mean, anytime someone is pushing their limits, and it doesn't have to be on a big mountain. I've interviewed all kinds of different adventurers that do all kinds of different things, but the consistent thread is that we're pushing limits, and anytime you do that, there's risk involved, and I don't think we would be human if we didn't assess that risk to make sure it's a valuable push, because pushing through the growth zone is not brings no value. It just brings danger. So I really appreciate you going into that, because you've painted this canvas of what adventure has looked like in your life. And again, going back to the insights that you have, you don't get a really vibrant canvas without the dark colors that are also there. I don't know if that metaphor makes any sense, but so I appreciate you being open to share that and how it has impacted even your decision making right now. So I don't want to leave Peak Lenin just yet, because there's a few more questions, but I want to put a pin here, and because the question really to me is, what is this? How do you see this shaping your future decision making around adventure? So we'll come back to that in a second. But is there anything else, any other stories from your time on Peak Lenin that stand out?
Yeah, I think there's a few, and I always try and, as you said there's dark moments and there's light moments, and the good moments were, one of the moments was when we were climbing from Camp 1 to Camp 2. So it's a little bit like, in terms of the geography, it's a little bit like Everest. So you have to go out of Camp 1, well, base camp on Everest, but Camp 1 and Lenin, up the glacier, and then through the good ice, like what's the Khumbu Icefall on Everest, which is for Lenin is kind of like a crevassed area where the glacier kind of meets the foot of the mountain, and it's quite a dangerous part of the climb, but also it's quite a brutal, it's like an overnight climb, and it's pretty tough. And I was climbing with Cami ahead of me, and it was simultaneously the most inspiring and demoralizing 8 hours of my life, because I'm pushing to altitude for the first time on the trip, and I've got heavy pack, because there's not the infrastructure there's on Everest or other big mountains. If you want it up further up, you take it. Like, if you want your bag, if you want it, you take it, kind of thing. So it's up to you how hard you want to make it. And I probably overpacked a little bit, so my pack was heavy. We were climbing overnight. It was tough, and climbing. So with Cami, he's just so smooth. Like, just watching how those guys move at altitude, move under load, was just, for me, was like a real, going back to my point about being part of the best and not wanting to try and be the best. Like, climbing with someone like that was such an amazing learning experience. And for me, again, going back maybe to the point about making mountains out of molehills and catastrophizing when I was younger, my crampon froze up, and so the buckle became really stiff, and then it started to come loose, but I couldn't tighten it because there was frost, and you've got a big pack on and you're weighed up with all your thermals, and you're in this environment where you can hear the mountain creaking around you and there's
Oh, wow.
crevasses, and it's quite a stressful, hectic environment to be in. And I was getting a bit like aggy. I was tired. I was, all that sort of stuff. I was definitely getting a point where I was sort of having to check myself and think, okay, I'm just stay calm. And Cammy just came up to me and just looked at me in the eye and said, Tom, just stay calm. It's okay. We'll fix it. And I remember thinking, in this environment that is, to all intents and purposes, quite a stressful environment to be in physically and mentally, Cammy's ability to just be completely calm and nonplussed by it, and just see the problem for what it was, and just take all emotion out of it and just go, it's fair, we'll fix it. Don't worry. And I thought that for me is like one of the biggest moments on the expedition was just being able to try and take his ability to just be calm in the face of whatever else we were doing was really cool. And I try and bring that into everyday life now. And when there's a problem, or if there's bills that need paying, or there's stuff happening in work, it's okay, we'll fix it. Don't worry about it. So that was a really fun moment for me, was just seeing a pro, seeing someone who's so good in those environments. And that moment really taught me a huge amount from that expedition.
So ties us right back to the companionship part of adventure. That what a huge added value to you to not only have his technical expertise, but something that I've learned over the last few years is the way our nervous systems, particularly with people that we're very close to, can tie together. And so on the one end of the scale, anxiety is contagious. If you're around someone that is constantly anxious, you're much more likely to get worked up. And likewise, the other side of that coin is that if you have a solid relationship with somebody, you can leverage their calm nervous system to calm your own nervous system. And so he used words, but I would venture to say there was a lot more going on there than just his words that was transmuted and came across to you to then calm your system down so that you could move on. Because the anxiety in a moment like that, I would imagine, is quite dangerous. That is not definitely the time to get anxious.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely his body language, everything about him in that moment was just, calm, cool, collected, no problems at all. And to your point there about how anxiety is infectious and contagious, and you're on these expeditions with strangers to start with. You meet up with people with different objectives, different mountains, but you're all in the same base camp, and you can have these conversations. And one other thing I learned from the expedition was having the bravery to have vulnerable conversations with people. And you're in the tent, and obviously we know Lenin's a dangerous mountain, things happen. We're chatting in the tent, and me and this other guy were hoping to summit Lenin, and you kind of don't know them at all, so you don't know what their proclivity for danger and risk is like. And obviously mine experiences we spoke about means that if there's an option to take, and I'll take the one that's less risky for sure. But you're with people, and you think, well, I don't want to slow them down, and you start thinking in your head and you start getting anxious about it. But then having an open conversation with the guy I was sharing a tent with, and he was the same. He was like, no, I'm not here to kill myself, I'm not here to get myself in danger. I'm here to have fun, and if the summit's there, we'll go for it, kind of thing. And his ability to have that conversation with me, and he started that conversation, how are you feeling, kind of thing, was one that I learned a lot from. And again, speaking how he was and how Cammy was, it was body language as well as what they were talking about.
Gosh, man, that's great. I don't even want to call it the softer side, but that's a different side of adventure that doesn't get talked about enough. I think not everyone, people tend to gravitate towards the adrenaline side of the story, and there's obviously plenty of that out there. But what you're describing is really the part that overlaps with real life. It's the stuff you bring home that makes you a better human being, makes life more enjoyable to live, really more of a wholehearted whole person. So that's a really cool story to be able to see where your adventure overlaps with what else you've got going on. And I would imagine you take that to the mentoring and coaching that you do with the kids as well.
Yeah, definitely. And also when I'm speaking to people in business as well, talking about what you learn on the expedition, and those are 2 points that I speak about a lot, is just having the ability to be calm in the face of objective danger, and chaos like Cami was, and then also just having those conversations of being brave enough to be vulnerable and say to people that I'm nervous about this and I'm not feeling great about it, and what's your risk appetite, and these kind of conversations that if you don't have them, you'll have them inside your own head, and you'll start thinking, I'll start thinking what you're thinking, maybe Josh is thinking about this, but you don't know. And that's when you can start to have teams that unravel, or people that unravel within teams. So yeah, for sure, when I'm speaking to the guys I'm coaching and mentoring, it's definitely around trying to stay calm, have perspective, as I spoke about, have a good relationship with that negative voice in your head, but also then having those conversations with people around you. How are you feeling? Because what you'll also find is most of the time they're feeling similar to you. Like on a big mountain, we're all a little bit nervous. So may as well talk about it because we're all feeling it.
Yeah, that's really good. And before I wrap up with kind of what you're looking to the future, let me ask you this. So you're a conservationist, you got a full-time job, you pursue these adventures around the globe, you host, I think, at least one, maybe two podcasts. You're on podcasts, you're a coach. How do you plan all of this? How do you pull all of this off without burning yourself out? And yeah, I mean, how do you do that?
It's tough, and I don't always get it right. I think you have to speak to my partner for sure, Emma, who will listen to this on the way through. So it'd be remiss of me not to mention that I don't always get it right for sure. So building up to peak Lenin last year, I didn't get the balance right at all, and I definitely neglected myself, my relationship, and that's the side of like ambition and progress and self-progression that I think needs to be spoken about more. That you don't always get it right. And yeah, those 3 months leading up to Lenin, when I was trying to get my kit organized and I was trying to get flights and I was trying to get myself in the best possible space that I could be, I didn't get the balance right there for sure. And so speaking to them, what we spoke about burning out and understanding my body, the way that I try and make sure that I get it right more often than not now with the podcast, with my day job, with the adventures and the coaching, that kind of stuff, is to try and have, obviously, so on an actionable level. So I always try and give kind of actionable advice where I can. So everyone has like a to-do list. You wake up on Monday morning, this is what the week needs to look like. Okay. And this is what my morning on Mondays, these are my tasks, this kind of stuff. What I always then try and counter that with is a for me list. So what am I going to do this week that's for me? And that isn't just a selfish thing. It's then for my relationship, for my, with them, but also then with friends, family, and then also for me personally. You've got that list of things to do. And when you are, like I'm sure lots of your listeners do, and I'm sure you do as well, Josh, you've got so many things pulling you. You've got day job, podcasts, you've got then commitments for this. You're also planning for your next expedition. Within those in almost unending to-do lists that come with that, how can I ensure that there's bits in there that are for me? Getting into nature, going for a walk, connecting with people around you, having that time to do the workout you want to do, whatever it is. So on an actionable level, it's trying to make sure that there's stuff in there that's helping me, as well as stuff that I'm trying to push for. I've got better at time management for sure, but ultimately it's an iterative process where I don't always get it right. And I'm sure as we build up to the next expedition, it'll be another battle where I'll need to make sure that I'm not burning the candle at both ends. I'm not burning out. I'm also not jeopardizing and sacrificing relationships with people around me. So yeah, I don't always get it right, but yeah, actionable tools that I try and use, is have that to-do list, not set ridiculous goals as well for like the week. So what I used to do was have like a to-do list, and I just hammer myself with like 50 things to do. I've got to get that sponsorship and that bit of kit, and I've got to do that workout and that. And you think ultimately you're just weighing yourself down with kind of stuff that could just be broken down into small chunks. So don't try and do everything at the same time, which I definitely used to do when I was first starting out trying to do expeditions on top of the day job, was have these enormous to-do lists and then beat myself up for not finishing it in the day or the week. So trying to get everything kind of bite-sized, triage it. So like what needs to be done today and what really can wait. What am I putting on my to-do list to make myself look like I've got loads to do? Because I do. I know not everyone else does, but I certainly try and have a proclivity to pile on stuff. I want to do that podcast. I want to get that. And okay, what needs triage it? What needs to be done? And then while I'm doing it, what can I do for me that's going to make sure that we don't burn out? And like I said, also understanding my body. When I start to get achy and sleepy, that means I'm when you're really tired, like 2 PM, it's because you're not getting the rest and the recovery you need. So it's definitely a process that I'm not not a pro at it yet, but yeah, certainly breaking things down, making sure I'm doing things for me as well is the key.
That's good. So from a real practical sense, I mentioned to you before we started recording, my day job is I'm a financial planner. I help people make financial decisions around their money that hopefully aligns it with the things that are most important to them and their values, which is investments and spreadsheets and like all those little kind of details. And I'm always curious when people are planning these big trips from a real practical standpoint. How do you do that? How do you carve out the time? How do you find the money? What happens if you don't find the money to do it? So can you spend a couple minutes and kind of talk through your process with that?
Yeah, for sure. So sponsorship acquisition, I suppose, as a kind of field to just trying to get the funds to do these kind of expeditions, because unfortunately, yeah, things like Everest, the South Pole, North Pole, these big expeditions, they are behind, to some extent, behind a paywall, and you can find ways around it, by cutting corners or whatever, but ultimately these things cost. So
What do you mean by behind a paywall? Meaning it's just really, really expensive, and so you can't just
yeah,
pick up and go do it?
yeah, I mean, you can pitch up, but even if you went to Peak Lenin completely by yourself, you still then need to pay to get into base camp to get a tent. You'd still need to pay the permits to get into the national park. So even if it's just a small amounts of money just to actually get there,
Mm-hmm.
you need the money to go and do it from somewhere. And so yeah, that's what I mean when I say behind a paywall. There's people that I know who, I mean, they may be full of hot air, I'm not sure, but people who say, oh, they'd love to do Everest one day, but it's $60,000. So like, how am I going to spend $60,000 on an expedition? It's difficult. And so yeah, acquiring sponsorship is tough. And for me, it was very much always aligned with the purpose of why I wanted to do the expedition from a marketing perspective. I wanted to do Peak Lenin for snow leopard conservation. So you come up with a nice hook, and then you find brands that align with it. But then really on a day-to-day, it is just about being as persistent as you possibly can, and sending as many emails as you can, getting into as many offices as you can to try and get in front of the right people. It's not easy. And particularly now with the global economic, I'm sure you're aware, you'll be acutely aware of it in your day job, like things are fluctuating beyond belief. And so companies are not spending on these kind of things like they used to. So being adaptable, being agile in your approach, finding hooks that align with different brands, different sectors, that's an area that's really testing for sure. And then once you then got the money, you've then got to make sure that every penny counts. You don't want to go over budget. So when it comes to the planning, and you spoke there about spreadsheets and organizing things, yeah, a lot of spreadsheets. Look at your kit that you need, what can you scrounge. And I was very fortunate to have an email exchange with Ranulph Fiennes a number of years ago, and I was starting out on this journey, and I just said, don't want to take up loads of your time, but just that golden question that everyone always asks people they look up to, like, what advice would you give someone trying to do it? He just said, you got to get really good at asking for everything for free. You just got to have no qualms in saying, haven't got the cash to do this, so can I have it for free? And what can you beg, borrow, and not steal, but what can you beg and borrow of people around you to help? And I think that's also a really nice learning that I've had from being in this adventure space. And I'm sure you feel the same. Like, people are really willing to help you out from an adventure perspective, and they'll lend you kit and they'll give you introductions. And there's competitiveness within it, but it's not competitiveness against each other. People want to see people succeed. So build a little community and network around you of people that have been before you and done things that you look up to, who are willing to give you a hand. And then from a really sort of tangible day-to-day, it is just about making sure that you're on track as best you can, and breaking down your to-do list into those small chunks of what training do I need to do, what bits of kit do I need, how much is it going to cost, can I get it for cheaper, and just try and get yourself into a position where you've got everything you need, you're in budget, and you're also physically also looking after yourself, because you can spend too much time just looking at what kit you need and the visas and this kind of stuff. So it's also then just trying to figure out, okay, am I physically where I need to be for this expedition too? But it's
do you keep a detailed record, like a big master spreadsheet of what I need and what I have, and how are we tracking between those two?
Yeah, for sure. So I've got I have a big master spreadsheet for the expedition last year, and it will have week to week training plans, how much distance I need to be covering and things that I'm ticking off in terms of, climbing work and long distance hiking with packs and that kind of stuff, the physical side. And then, spreadsheets of have I got this visa? Have I got this? Have I got that? You know, have I got my insurance sorted? Is it the right insurance? What kit do I need? Because as we all know in adventure stuff, particularly in mountaineering, there's a world out there of different kit suppliers and different downfill levels and waterproof levels and all this stuff. You've got to wade your way through it. And so, yeah, finding an organization that can help you. So like adventure consultants or adventure peaks or these kind of these organizers that can help you with kit and ideas about how to get fundraising and sponsorship too is really important. But yeah, it is that. I think the best way to describe it is, and it's not my phrase, it's a phrase that gets banded around a lot, because we had the London Marathon last weekend, and they call that the victory lap, because you have all that training and then the race is your victory lap. And it's the same with expeditions. You have all the stuff you've got to go through, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. The expedition is there as your victory lap, and make sure you get yourself in a position physically, mentally, and also from a technical perspective of all your kit in the best possible position to go and have fun and enjoy yourself.
That's great. That's a really helpful insight to see how you plan and manage this to pull these things off. Because maybe some people see the results of what you're doing or what any explorer would be accomplishing and go, oh, that's cool, without realizing the months and months, sometimes years of efforts that lead up to it. So
yeah, years is definitely the time frame I've been with it. I mean, yeah, like I say, with talking about Dixie, and the plan was North Pole, and started that venture in 2016, and I've still not been to the North Pole for financial, political reasons as well now, with everything that's happening in that part of the world. So yeah, it's a lot of these big expeditions do take years to go with, and that's where the whole topic of goal setting comes in, and how to keep yourself motivated and how to just be persistent with it, because it's not easy. So yeah, if anyone is listening who's trying to plan a big expedition, I feel your pain. I'm there with you every step of the way. All of those spreadsheets and emails and pitches that you pitch to companies for money and you don't get it. Yeah, I've been there and I feel your pain. So yeah, we just got to stick at it.
Just keep going. Yeah. Which is the same mantra on any trek or adventure, like one foot after the other.
Yeah, one step at a time.
So I think you just alluded to this, but tell me a little bit about what you'd really like to do next. And without, kind of throwing some generic question out there, what's next for you, Tom? But like, what do you really want to challenge yourself with next?
From a professional standpoint, so in the day job, I want to keep evolving the way that conservation and charity to some extent, but from my own sphere of influence, conservation interacts with businesses. So evolving that relationship, trying to attract new investment into what we're about and what we're doing, because there's so many cool avenues, from green marketing, ESG, employee engagement. There's loads of ways that what charities do can work really nicely with businesses and actually feed back to what their business model is, rather than just being a donation based. There's so many ways to turn that linear relationship cyclical. So from a day job, that's kind of the new iteration that I'm really excited about. And then from an expedition adventure perspective, the next big thing for me, hopefully, touch wood, will be heading the South Pole with a guy called Alan Chambers, who knew Dixie really well. They used to work together in Svalbard a lot. So it's really cool to connect with Alan. And he's also, like Dixie, a complete rock star in that sphere. He's, again, like Dixie, multiple North-South Pole expeditions. He's very much the phrase I've used a number of times. Being with him means I'm part of the best. I'm definitely not the best. I'm part of the best with him. So yeah, we'll work towards Svalbard, which is a part of northern Norway, so near Longyearbyen in the archipelago of northern Norway. Head there in March, hopefully next year. And then potentially, if we've got funds and time, head to Canada, go sort of around Resolute Bay and do some training there. And then if all goes well and we get everything on track, we'll try and hit the South Pole from the continent edge. Not just the last degree expedition. We'll do it hopefully from not sure of the route yet, but one of the points from the continent edge to the South Pole in 2026 November time.
Will you transect the entire continent, or will it be pole and then back to the starting point?
Yeah, so we're looking at now. So with time constraints and everything, we'll probably go edge to pole, and then we're just looking whether we then go to an extraction point, or if we get taken up from the South Pole, because there is quite good infrastructure
I see.
on Antarctica. So there are various pickup points you can hit to. So we're just looking at those final details now, and I'm relying heavily on Alan's experience from that side of things as to the best routes and people to work with as well. But hopefully try and rather than just doing nothing against doing the last degree. It's still an amazing expedition, but being with someone like Alan means you're going to push yourself. So we'll try and go from the edge to the pole and then decide whether we go from there. But it's something I've always wanted. Like I say, the North Pole for me was always the one, but it's just too tricky up there, and that's a whole other podcast about the challenges of North Pole expeditions at the moment. But it's basically
you said some of that is political.
Very political. Very
Really?
political. Yeah. So essentially what would happen is every year they would build Borneo, which is like an ice station, which is, I think it was at like 87 degrees, maybe. North. Someone listening will probably tell me I'm talking nonsense, but quite far up. And it was heavily reliant on Russian infrastructure and Russian operatives. The ice station now is owned by a Swedish billionaire, registered to a Swiss company, but still heavily reliant on Russian infrastructure. And so there are a lot of moving parts, all of which in the last I think it's 2017, no one's been to the geographic North Pole due to these kind of reasons, that no one can get it sorted out up there.
Oh wow.
And then from an environmental perspective as well, so if you don't want to use Borneo as your start point, you can go from the Canadian side. But because of the way that the ice breaks up now and it doesn't freeze as solid and there isn't as much of it, you haven't got enough time from when the winter nights and the winter environment is more palatable to human exposure. You haven't got enough time from that point to then the point of when the ice breaks up and you then need a boat to get from Resolute or from the Canadian side to the North Pole. So it's political, it's environmental, it's also incredibly expensive. Not that the South Pole isn't expensive as well, as we spoke about behind the paywall. But there's so many moving parts to it. And so as I understand it, no one has been to the geographic North Pole since 2017.
Wow. So you said Everest is about 60 grand to
right. Yeah.
What is the South Pole, do you think, going to total up to?
So we're looking at about 250,000.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So it's
and the North Pole would be even more than that?
The North Pole now, you could probably, I mean, again, you can spend as much as you want on it in terms of how you go for it. But it's around that. So the North Pole was going up about 15-20% year on year since about 2002. So it was getting up in the hundreds of thousands. That's GBP, that's pounds, and then obviously dollars as well. Yeah. So it was going up and up and up and up and up. And there's people that have spent a lot of money trying to get to the North Pole who've not been able to do so because of the factors we spoke about. So it's a very expensive undertaking. Everest, 60-ish. But from what I understand, the Nepalese government, the last couple of days, obviously it's Everest season now, so it's all in the news. They've just changed it, or they're going to try and change it, that you're only allowed to have a crack at Everest now if you've done at least one 7,000 meter mountain in Nepal previously. So you then need to save up for 2 expeditions. Basically, you need to get to Nepal and do a 7,000 meter one, and then the year after, or however long it goes. So Everest kind of 60,000 US, but then with having to do another one, you're looking at 100,000. And that's
what do you think about that rule?
I think I support it. I support that rule. I think from a economic perspective for Nepal, Everest is such a huge pull, but so many people just do Everest and then never go back. So they don't get a lot of repeat custom, for want of a better phrase. So from an economic perspective, it's the Nepalese leveraging their resources, and like any other nation would do. And then from a mountaineering perspective, it really does mitigate that threat of people being on Everest that aren't prepared to be on Everest. And I've heard stories of people who, their Sherpas are literally holding them up for their summit photo and then, like dragging them down. And all you're going to do is put the Sherpas and the people in your team under immense pressure and jeopardize their safety as well. So it'll help make sure that people on Everest are prepared to climb Everest. And also it just means, Nepal are going to get more money out of their resources. And I think it's a positive step for them for sure.
Yeah. Well, Tom, this has been really enlightening for me to see where, what conservation on the ground looks like. That's not something it's not in my normal sphere for sure. But the way that you have overlapped purpose with adventure. And granted, some of it, you're using it to raise funds to go do these things that you want to do, but there's multiple beneficiaries to the fact that you want to do these things. So, and I know your podcast itself is on building a purpose-driven life. And clearly, you and I having just met, but clearly you're doing that. And you're a great illustration of what that looks like and how to pull it off. I guess to put a bow on this, where can people find you? What is it that you want, if you could leave kind of a parting shot to give to someone looking to embark on their own purpose-driven adventure, what shot would you leave us with?
So to answer that question of, finding something to power your expedition, your adventure, I think taking some time to experience new things and different areas. So for me, I was obviously like a very fortunate when I was younger to experience African wildlife and conservation. That's where, and that shaped my life. But if I hadn't had that experience, I'd have had to have gone and found it through other means. So I'd say be really open to new opportunities and say yes to a lot of interesting ideas and projects that come across your desk, and you'll find something that really, really resonates with you. Use that then as the fuel to then drive you to go and do something exciting. And like I say, for my stuff, I always try and ensure that there's some level of altruism towards what I'm doing, and my cause is conservation, but it could easily be education, healthcare, sustainability, whatever kind of floats your boat. I would say be curious and open to those opportunities, and then build a network of people around you that have done it before. So like we said, no one's a self-made podcast host or self-made adventurer. So, and I'm definitely not. So I'm lucky to lean on a number of people who are far better than me, far more experienced than I am, who are just very generous with their time. So find that cause that connects with you. Find people that are experts in that field that you can lean on, and then you'll find what it is you want to do. And for me, it was and still is the North Pole, but now, in reality, the South Pole. And that's just come through meeting incredible people and doors open for you. So that would be my parting bit of advice. I say, be curious, build a network of people around you, have exciting conversations, and say yes to things.
That's really cool. And where can people find you, either on social media or website? What would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I have a website, which is tomhicksadventurer.co.uk, where I have basically a kind of hub of what I'm up to. And we've just launched a new project working with a Tanzanian company taking people up Kilimanjaro. So if anyone is keen to head over to Tanzania and have a crack at the roof of Africa, all the information's on there. But yeah, feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn, Tom Hicks MSc, and then on other socials, it's at Tom Hicks Adventurer. And I'll be up for any conversations, and I'm always keen to learn. So if people have heard something I've said and think that I could be doing things a bit differently, always up for having a chat about different ways of iterating the process. But equally, if I can help on anyone else's journey, is very, very happy to do so. That's
cool. Well, Tom, thanks for spending your Friday afternoon talking through adventure with me. And, when you finish this South Pole expedition, we're going to do it again, because I'm really curious to hear how it goes.
No, Josh, thanks so much for inviting me on. It's been awesome to finally catch up with you. And like I said, just keep up the great work, because I've been a fan of the pod for a long time. So it's cool to be on it with you.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the On Adventure podcast. Be on the lookout for another episode dropping in a couple weeks. And be sure to go to our YouTube page and subscribe and follow us there, as well as on all the socials from Facebook to Instagram and LinkedIn. Until our next episode, I hope you stay safe and stay on adventure.